just my power. Okay. All right. This month's topic is health is wealth, and we're talking about different aspects of health. So far, we've discussed spiritual health, and then last week we discussed financial health. This week, we're going to focus in on physical health. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Give me 1 second. So, so I titled our lesson God's Property because while we're going to explore physical health, we're also going to view it through the lens of stewardship as one of our foundations. And, when I was preparing for this lesson, I was trying to figure out like what to talk about with regards to um, physical health practices. And of course, like diet and food immediately came to mind because that's one of the most popular ones that we probably hear about. And, I do have some stuff at the end if we have time, but I want to spend the majority of our lesson discussing two other components of physical health, and those are preventative care visits and Sabbath rest. So let's get into the lesson. Okay, so first, let's explore like the reason why we want to have good physical health. So why should we take care of our physical bodies? One reason is because our bodies do not belong to us. God holds the ultimate authority and ownership over everything in the world, and that is concisely captured in Psalms 24:1. It says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all its people belong to him." But in his grace, God has granted us stewardship over many things during our time here on earth. And I wanted to quickly define stewardship. I looked in Thayer's dictionary, and it defines a steward as a manager um, that the head of the house or proprietor has entrusted with management of their affairs, care of receipts and expenditures, and distributions of portions to servants and underage children. So, a steward is someone who is hired by a manager to pretty much manage like the things that they own. So it's their resources, their affairs. But while the steward is the manager of those things, the proprietor remains the owner. So if we sort of expand that analogy to who we are, and from a spiritual perspective, God, who created all, is the owner of the world, but he grants us management or stewardship over things according to his divine direction. And then again, looking from a spiritual perspective, I think we do discuss stewardship. Oftentimes, it's in terms of time. In Ephesians 5:5-16, it says, "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil." We also talk about it in terms of gifts and talents. And last year, we even had a whole series about spiritual gifts. So go back and review that if you're interested in learning more. But 1 Peter 4:10 says, "Each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms." And then we can also think about stewardship in terms of resources. Um, Early on in Genesis, at the beginning of creation, um, Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." So, um, another area that we are granted stewardship over is also our bodies. And 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." So, this passage is in response to sexual sin. It uses a concept of stewardship to explain why Christians should refrain from sin. Believers are reminded that they do not own their bodies because it was bought at an immeasurable price through the work and the sacrifice of Christ. And therefore, God owns us because He created us. He sacrificed His Son for us, and He implanted His Spirit into everyone who obeys the gospel. So, while this passage is specifically talking about sexual sin, I think it can be applied to general stewardship over our bodies as well. So, while we are on earth, God grants us stewardship over our bodies and calls us to honor Him with our bodies. And honoring God includes obedience, as outlined in this verse. It also includes using our time, gifts, and talents and resources for His glory, as outlined in the verses that I shared in the previous slide. But we also honor God by taking care of our physical bodies so we can be healthy vessels for the work of God. So that's sort of going to be our foundation. We're going to think about it in terms of stewardship, the why of why we should have good physical health. And then another important reason for Black people in particular to practice good stewardship over their health is because the rates of disease are disproportionately higher among Black people compared to other racial groups. Um, don't know if you all know, I work at the California Department of Public Health, and I do seasonal influenza surveillance, so monitor influenza activity for trends and also to help, suggest different interventions. And we put out reports on a weekly basis. So it's a very heavily surveillance focused disease because it has pandemic potential. Um, we all like joked about hopefully being retired by the next flu pandemic, but we didn't know that the next pandemic would actually be caused by SARS. But just wanted to share a little bit of that, and also that I was drawn to the field of public health because it emphasizes prevention and community health. So I know public health has been in the public eye a lot more since the pandemic, but I wanted to just quickly share what it is. So public health is the science of protecting and improving the health of people and their communities. Public health functions by promoting healthy lifestyles, researching disease and injury prevention, and detecting, preventing, and responding to infectious diseases. Overall, public health is concerned with protecting the health of the entire population, and prevention is a huge component of public health. So it's like, how do we keep people from getting sick in the first place? Um, and then one of the things that comes out of like community health studies are the identification of health disparities and contributors to poor health outcomes. So health disparities are preventable differences in the disease, injury, violence, or opportunities to achieve optimal health that are experienced by socially disadvantaged populations. In the US, health disparities between Black and white people are really alarming. Black people have higher rates of things like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease compared to other groups. And that is not a complete list. And in addition, Black children have, for example, a 500% higher death rate from asthma compared to white children. In the Black community, the causes of these health disparities are multifactorial. Behavioral factors, which are often emphasized and important, like diet and exercise, contribute to some degree, but social determinants of health are larger factors that are more challenging to address, and they actually contribute a big portion to these health disparities. So, what are social determinants of health? So, these are non medical factors that influence health outcomes. They are the conditions that people are born in, grow in, work, live, and age in. And they're just a wider set of forces and systems. And they include things like economic policies and systems, social policy, racism, climate change, and political systems. And, a couple examples of those is that um, in Black communities or disadvantaged communities in general, you may see these what they would call food deserts, where there's a community where there's not easy access to a grocery store, but you might see, a bunch of liquor stores and fast food restaurants like that. So there's little access to healthy options. Another thing that you may see in certain communities that can be considered a social determinant of health is when it comes to like building for transportation in suburban communities. Generally, it's outside or it's sort of underground, but in communities that are impacted by health disparities, oftentimes the building is above ground, and there's noise pollution and other types of pollution that can impact people's health. So these health disparities that exist among the Black community and the challenges of addressing the systemic forces that contribute to them is it makes it especially important for Black people to make good personal health choices, because those are things that we are somewhat in control of. As I mentioned before, the social determinants of health and other factors like racism, for example, which is another thing that can poorly impact health outcomes, are things that take policy changes and larger, longer changes to see the impact. So doing things like exercising, consuming a healthy diet, seeking preventative care, and advocating for yourself in the healthcare setting are a few examples of ways to improve your health, although you may be still impacted by social determinants of health that are out of your control. And for the rest of the lesson, we're going to look at two of these practices that you can incorporate. The first is preventative care visits. So, preventative care visits are yearly appointments that are intended to prevent illness and detect health concerns early before symptoms are noticeable. These are different from doctor's visits for sickness or illness. So, sometimes these are termed well visits. So, you're going when you're well, and the doctor is conducting a few things. So, one is a physical exam, checking your vitals and weight and things like that. The other thing that will happen at these preventative care visits are screening tests. And screening tests are medical tests to check for disease early when it may be easier to treat them. Cancer screenings are an example of screening tests. These tests check your body for cancer before you have symptoms. And getting a screening test regularly may find breast, cervical, colon cancers, or other types of cancers early when treatment is likely to work best. Another thing that is likely to take place at a preventative care visit are lab tests. You may hear like a term blood work, as well as blood pressure measurement. And these things can help detect anemia, diabetes, thyroid disease, high cholesterol, hypertension, just to name a few. And then lastly, other services like vaccines that help improve your health by preventing disease and other health problems may also take place at these preventative care visits. In addition, during your preventative care visits, it's also important to share an accurate family health history of disease to your doctor. Family health history is a record of diseases and health conditions in your family. Since you and your family members share genes, you may be more likely to get the same diseases that are in your family. And this information will help guide your doctor to test you earlier or to test you for specific things to look for signs of disease that run in your family. So, one example is like diabetes runs in my family, and along with the blood test, they can do a test called an A1C test, and that can tell you where you're at with regards to your blood sugar levels, and it's a tool for diagnosing diabetes, and they generally will check it at a certain age, but if it runs in your family, they may start to check it first or earlier. So it's good to have a family health history that you can share with your doctor at your preventative care visits. And I want to shout out Jonathan, because he he shared this with us last week. He talked about, heart health, and he talked about the importance of having your annual preventative care visits. If you haven't had your yearly preventative care visit, I would really encourage you to make an appointment. Mine is actually scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Another thing I'll share is that before my appointments, I like to make notes of things that I want to discuss with my doctor, because sometimes when I get there, I forget. So making notes and thinking about it beforehand, and even looking at, the types of screenings that you can have at your age, or that you may want to have if you have certain conditions that run in your family, it's helpful. I think that it's really important for us to advocate for ourselves, and to ask questions, and to come prepared so that we can ask the right questions when we are seeing our doctors. All right, so I'm going to shift to the next healthy practice that I want to discuss tonight, and that is Sabbath rest. And before we get into practical applications, we're going to start with a little bit of biblical history. So the concept of rest is first introduced in the Bible after God creates the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1 covers the creation, in which God created light on the first day, and he ended by creating humans on the sixth day. And the 7-day week is also alluded to in this passage of scripture. We're going to pick up at Genesis 2, which happens on the seventh day after God completes creation. It reads, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." So the word for rest is Strong's H7673, and it means to cease, desist from exertion or rest. And we see in this passage that God ceased work and rested on the seventh day. But we also know that God is the source and creator of all things physical and intangible. And we know that he's almighty and all powerful. So why did God rest? Like, did he need to rest? So let's look at that a little bit. So his rest on the seventh day was not because he was tired. God rested because he completed the work of creation, and he also rested in order to model a time of rest during the 7-day week, and also to establish the blessing and sanctity of rest. In God's goodness, he foreknew that people would physically tire from work. He also knew that people would be prone to overworking themselves and feeling like they need to work for worthiness, salvation, and approval from others. So God created rest so that we can cease work, recharge physically and mentally, and refocus on him as our source. And then the word for rest in Genesis 2 is related to the word for Sabbath that is used for the fourth commandment, the Sabbath command in Exodus 28 through 11. And let's read that. It's a little longer passage, so bear with me. "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So to reiterate, want to say that the Sabbath was intended as a blessed rest for people. Over time, religious leaders began to introduce legalistic Sabbath rules into the Israelite community. Out of their own knowledge, these leaders would define what could and could not be done on the Sabbath, and the result was a Sabbath unlike the one God created as a blessed respite. Um, Instead, the religious leaders promoted a Sabbath that was more like bondage that focused on rules over rest. And Jesus addressed these religious leaders' man made rules and stipulations for the Sabbath in the book of Luke and Mark. We're going to look at the passage in Mark, but first I'm going to give a little background about the previous verses. So in Mark 22:23 through 28, the Pharisees accused Jesus of breaking the law when he and his disciples picked grain to eat on the Sabbath. In verse 27 and 28, Jesus responds to them and reminds them the purpose of the Sabbath. That's it. The verse 27 starts with, "Then Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over Sabbath." So Christ is just reiterating to them that the Sabbath is not about rules, that it was made as a blessing for man. And in many ways, he was breaking the customs and beliefs of the times and intentionally doing so that he can teach. And Christ's Christ's death on the cross and his resurrection also freed everyone from the law of the Sabbath, so like the actual command of it, but the importance and blessing of Sabbath rest still remain, even though it wasn't a law anymore. And then just to bring it back to today, I think that the need for rest remains, especially in the US during times when hustle culture is prevalent. A Forbes article titled Hustle Culture defines it as a culture that puts work at the center of life. Long working hours are praised and glorified. Time off is seen as laziness. If you're not hustling, you are failing. So during biblical times, there was this focus on rules, and it sort of, became like bondage to the Israelites. Sort of what they couldn't do. And I would say today, like the culture has shifted to like just like being somewhat averse to rest and shaming people or making people feel lazy for resting and just praising like work and hustling. So it's a little bit different in that way, but both were attacks on rest essentially. And I just want to say that, I know that work is good. We're called to work as well, but we have to remember to accompany work with balance and boundaries. We're designed both to work and to rest. And without rest, we're less efficient and we're more prone to sickness and disease. And resting, and that is taking breaks as well as getting adequate sleep, is just as important to your physical health as diet and exercise. Peter Scarzero outlines a great 4-part framework for Sabbath rest in his book titled Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. His framework is built around keeping the Sabbath every 7 days for a 24-hour period. But if you can't take a whole day, you can allot as much time as you can to rest. And I'm just going to quickly go over and summarize his frameworks. So the first thing to do for Sabbath, the first component of the 4-part framework, is to stop. And then that means that you cease all work, both paid and unpaid. When you stop, you're embracing limitations by letting go of the illusion that you are indispensable to the running of the world, and you're better able to recognize that you will not be able to finish all your goals and projects, and that God is on the throne managing and ruling the universe without your help. Second is rest. So stopping will enable you to accept God's invitation of rest. God rested after his work of creation, so we are to do the same. And in that time, use it to engage in activities that restore and replenish you. Things like meditating, napping, hiking, reading, or whatever helps you feel restored. And, you know, being able to have this time will require some pre-planning, being able to do the things that the routine task and things that you decide not to do on the Sabbath day, you'll have to incorporate that into, the other days of the week or the other times that you're not in your Sabbath. The next is to delight. So after finishing his work in creation, God pronounced it very good in Genesis 1:31. And God invites us to join in the celebration of his completed work by enjoying and delighting in his creation, which we can call people, places, and things. So on your Sabbath, engage in things that bring you joy and delight. What brings delight, of course, varies from person to person. For me, I enjoy being by the water and eating and just having quality time with loved ones. And then the last framework is to contemplate. And in this space, you're pondering the love of God because that's the central focus of Sabbath. You're not taking time off from God during your Sabbath. Instead, you're using that time to draw closer to Him. So the time you're taking away from other things, you are redirecting to focus in on God. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily spending the entire day in prayer or studying scripture. Contemplation means you're intentionally looking for God's love and the evidence of Him in all the things that you enjoy and all the blessings that you have. So, this is just one framework of Sabbath. And, you can, of course, make it your own. But, regardless of how you spend your Sabbath, just make sure to take time you need to rest. Sabbath is one of the things that I've been trying to intentionally work on this year. It's one of my words of the year. And I typically set out to have a Saturday or Friday night to rest and reflect. And when I'm able to make time for Sabbath rest, I feel more clarity, calm, and better equipped for the upcoming week. I'm still working on completely ceasing work and even combating with thoughts about what things or quote unquote productive things I could be doing with that time. But I'm still putting forth the effort to set aside the space for rest, and I'm just going to remain dedicated to working that out this year. So, yeah, I just want to leave you all with one piece of advice, and that is to take care of yourself. Make that preventative care visit, make time for rest, make sure, along with Sabbath rest, that you're getting enough sleep as well. Adults, it's recommended that adults get 7 to 9 hours of sleep, but about 20% of Americans are only sleeping maybe 6 hours a night, and 80% of Americans report having sleep disturbances at least one night a week. So just really take care of yourselves and make sure that you're giving your body what you need. That's it. Thank you. Are there any questions or